The Alpha King stumbled upon his enemy's Luna in the blizzard, protecting the pups with her own body. I'm about to tell you a story of fate, power, and an unexpected bond that no one saw coming. But before we dive into today's dramatic tale, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more captivating stories. Your support means the world to us. Now, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you so much. Now, let's get started. On a bitterly cold night, the blizzard raged fiercely across the kingdom, turning the forest into a labyrinth of ice and snow. The wind howled like a wolf in the distance as Alpha King Darius made his way through the darkened woods, his breath forming mist in the freezing air. He had been tracking his enemies for days, his mind set on vengeance. His rival, the notorious leader of the Eastern Pack, had crossed the line one too many times. But tonight, the hunt was different. Tonight, fate had other plans for him. As the snowstorm intensified, Darius stumbled upon something he wasn't prepared for. Buried beneath a pile of snow, hidden in the shadows of the trees, was a figure, a woman, huddled protectively around a group of pups. She was shaking, her clothes torn, but there was something about her that made Darius stop in his tracks. Her presence was magnetic, and despite the brutal cold, she seemed to radiate warmth. She was no ordinary woman. Her scent, despite the harsh wind, was unmistakable. Luna. But not just any Luna. She was Ava, the Luna of his enemy. Ava had been abandoned, left behind in the chaos of battle. Her only focus now was the pups under her protection. The harsh winds whipped against her as she shielded the small creatures with her own body, her heart pounding with fear for their safety. Her legs were trembling from exhaustion, but she didn't care. As long as she could protect them, she would. Darius had heard the stories. Ava, the once rejected Omega, was now a symbol of strength for those she cared for. But to him, she was still an enemy. Yet here, she was, fighting to protect those who depended on her, no matter the cost. Darius watched in stunned silence as she held the pups close to her chest, her eyes scanning the storm for any threat. His first instinct was to step forward, to confront her, but something in his chest tightened. He couldn't explain it. Something about her bravery, her selflessness, stirred something deep within him. He didn't understand why, but he knew he had to help her. Despite the tension between their packs, despite the war that had torn them apart, in this moment, he couldn't just stand by. Ava looked up, her heart skipping a beat when her eyes locked with Darius's. She had expected to die alone, her life ending in the snowstorm. But now, standing before her was none other than the Alpha King himself. His piercing gaze met hers, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. Fear? Respect? She couldn't tell. You're far from your kingdom, Ava whispered, her voice hoarse from the cold. Darius took a step closer, his breath steady, despite the weight of the moment. And you're far from yours, he replied, his voice low but firm. For a long moment, neither spoke. The blizzard raged around them, but in that fleeting silence, it felt as if the world had paused. Darius didn't know what had drawn him here, but one thing was clear, he couldn't leave her to die. Not like this. Not while she was protecting those innocent pups. Ava had every reason to hate him. He was the Alpha King of her enemies. Yet, in her eyes, he saw no hatred, only determination. And something else, something he hadn't expected. She wasn't just an enemy. She was a protector, a mother, someone who deserved more than this. As the storm continued to howl, Darius made a choice. He would not let her face this alone. He reached out a hand toward Ava, the cold biting at his skin, but in that moment, he didn't feel the chill. He felt the warmth of the bond forming between them, something neither of them could deny. Ava hesitated for a moment, then slowly, cautiously, took his hand. She didn't know what this meant, or where it would lead, but for the first time in a long while, she felt a glimmer of hope. The Alpha King was not her enemy tonight. He was her protector, and maybe, just maybe, fate had a plan for them both. As the storm raged on, Darius pulled Ava and the pups close to him, sheltering them from the cold. The war between their packs may have torn them apart, but tonight, under the fury of the blizzard, something new was born between them. Something neither of them could have predicted. And in that moment, they were not enemies. They were something more. and that would change everything. As Darius held Ava and the pups close, the blizzard seemed to rage even fiercer around them. But inside the small shelter Darius had quickly built out of the snow, it felt oddly calm. His body was pressed against Ava's, the warmth from his strong frame giving her a fleeting sense of safety. For the first time in days, she allowed herself to breathe, to feel something other than fear for the pups and the battle that awaited them. Ava's heart was still pounding, but she could feel her senses slowly returning to her. She glanced up at the Alpha King, the man who had been her enemy for so long, the man whose pack had caused so much pain to hers. Yet, in this moment, his presence was a strange comfort. Darius noticed her gaze and met her eyes, the storm raging in his chest not matching the quiet, intense calm he saw in hers. He had always seen Omegas as weak, fragile, just pawns in the grand game between packs. But Ava, she wasn't like the others. He could see it in the way she had thrown herself into the storm, protecting those pups with everything she had. She was more than a Luna. She was a warrior in her own right. "You're brave," Darius said softly, his voice carrying a surprising amount of admiration. Ava's lips parted slightly in shock at the words, but she quickly masked it with a forced smile. "I had no choice. These pups need me," she replied, her voice hoarse from the cold and exhaustion. "I'm just doing what's necessary." Darius nodded, understanding her words in a way he hadn't expected. He could feel his respect for her growing, despite everything that separated them, despite their packs, despite the history of violence and hatred. In the middle of a snowstorm, with nothing but the sound of the wind around them, they were two people brought together by fate, something neither of them could ignore. He reached out, gently brushing the snow from her hair, his fingers lingering near her temple before he let his hand fall away. Ava felt the heat of his touch on her skin, and for a moment, she forgot the harsh conditions and the danger that still lurked outside. There was something about Darius that disarmed her, something she couldn't quite place. It was his quiet strength, the way he seemed to hold it all together, despite the turmoil inside. "We'll stay here for the night," Darius said, his voice steady as he took a seat beside her, his back against the snow shelter. "You need rest, and so do the pups." Ava nodded, grateful for the warmth he had given them both, even if it was just a temporary comfort. The storm showed no signs of letting up, and she knew they had to wait it out. She glanced down at the pups, all huddled close together, their small bodies trembling from the cold, but still alive. That was all that mattered. "Thank you," she whispered, not looking directly at him, but knowing he would hear her. Darius tilted his head slightly, confused. "For what?" "For protecting us," she said softly. "I don't know what you're expecting from this, but you're saving our lives. I don't know why you're helping me, but thank you." Darius felt a flicker of something inside him, something he hadn't allowed himself to feel in a long time. Guilt, maybe. Regret, maybe. But it was quickly buried by the cold resolve that had defined his life for years. He was the Alpha King. He had never needed to explain his actions. But in this moment, with Ava's words hanging in the air, he realized something had shifted. "You don't need to thank me," he said quietly, his voice thick with something he couldn't name. "I'm doing what any alpha would do. Protecting what's mine." Ava's heart skipped a beat at his words, but before she could respond, she felt something else, an overwhelming sense of exhaustion. Her body ached from the cold, her energy drained from days of running, fighting, and protecting. She leaned back against the snow, closing her eyes for a moment. Darius watched her, his eyes softening as she finally allowed herself to relax. The battle might still be ahead, but, for now, at least, they had this moment of peace. As the hours passed, the storm began to die down. The winds howling grew quieter, the snow falling at a gentler pace. Ava stirred as the first light of dawn crept through the cracks in the snow shelter. The pups were still nestled close, and Darius was sitting nearby, his eyes watching over them. She realized then that the night had passed without any more attacks. They had survived. But what came next? She wasn't sure. But she knew one thing. Her bond with Darius was no longer defined by hatred. Something had changed, something neither of them could explain. Darius stood, his broad frame casting a shadow over her as he offered her his hand. "We should get moving," he said, his tone firm. "The storm's passed, and we need to find shelter before night falls again." Ava took his hand, still unsure of what to make of the strange connection between them, But knowing that for now, this was where she had to be. They had no choice but to move forward, together. They both had enemies to face. But for a brief moment, they were not enemies. They were two souls who had crossed paths in the storm, and maybe, just maybe, fate had something more in store for them. As Ava and Darius ventured deeper into the snow-covered forest, the storm had finally subsided, leaving behind a cold, quiet stillness. The first rays of dawn pierced through the dense trees, casting a soft glow on the path ahead. The pups, nestled securely in Ava's arms, had fallen asleep, their small bodies finally at ease after the brutal night. Darius walked beside her, his steps steady and measured, his eyes scanning the surroundings, ever vigilant. For a long while, neither spoke, the weight of their shared silence heavier than the snow that still clung to the ground. Ava, still lost in her thoughts, couldn't shake the strange feeling she had when she looked at Darius. The Alpha King, a man who had been nothing but a symbol of her pack's enemy, was now walking alongside her, protecting the pups she held so dearly. It was an odd feeling, one she couldn't quite name, but it tugged at her chest with each step she took. She had expected more anger, more resistance from him, but instead, he had been nothing but protective. Maybe it was the storm that had brought them together, or maybe it was something deeper, something neither of them understood yet. But as the cold air nipped at her cheeks, she knew one thing for sure. This wasn't how she had imagined meeting the Alpha King. "Do you think it's safe now?" Ava's voice broke the silence, her words barely above a whisper, as if speaking louder would break the fragile peace between them. Darius glanced at her, his icy blue eyes studying her face, before turning his gaze back to the trail ahead. "The storm has passed, but we still have a long way to go. We need to get to higher ground, somewhere safer," he replied, his voice low, but firm. Ava nodded, feeling a flicker of relief at his words. Safe. For now, that was all she needed. She had been running for so long, her only focus to protect the pups and herself from the chaos her pack had been thrust into. But now, as she walked beside the Alpha King, she found herself wondering what this would mean for them both. "Why are you doing this?" she asked, the question slipping from her lips before she could stop herself. She hadn't meant to ask it out loud, but now that she had, she couldn't take it back. Darius didn't answer right away. His face remained impassive, but Ava could see the slight clench of his jaw. It was clear he was thinking, weighing his response. "You think I'm doing this for some kind of gain?" he finally said, his voice harder than before, though not unkind. "No," Ava said quickly, shaking her head. "I just don't understand why you would help me, after everything that's happened between our packs." Darius's eyes softened ever so slightly as he turned to look at her, his gaze more searching now, as if trying to read her. "Because you saved them," he said simply, his voice steady. "You protected the pups, even when the storm was trying to kill us all. That's more than anyone could expect from a Luna, from an Omega. You deserve better than what your pack has given you." Ava felt a strange twist in her chest at his words. She wasn't sure if it was gratitude or something else, something more confusing. She had never been seen like this before. Her whole life, she had been told she was weak, that she was nothing but a burden. But here, in the middle of the wilderness, with Darius by her side, those words didn't seem to matter. "I'm not a hero," she muttered, looking down at the snow beneath her feet. "I'm just doing what any mother would do." Darius smiled faintly at her words. "Maybe," he agreed, his voice softer now. "But you're doing it with more courage than most would ever have." Ava didn't know how to respond to that. She had never been praised, especially not by an Alpha King. As they continued walking, the path ahead became clearer, and the distant sounds of wildlife filled the air, the harsh quiet of the storm fading into the background. But Ava couldn't shake the feeling that something was shifting between them, something that would change everything. "We need to keep moving," Darius said after a while, his voice steady. "The further we go, the more dangerous it gets. We're close to the border of my territory now." Ava's heart skipped a beat. She had heard stories of the Alpha King's lands, their ferocity, their strength, and their absolute power. But she never imagined she would be standing at the edge of it, walking side by side with the man who ruled it all. "Are you planning to take me back to your pack?" she asked, the words tasting bitter in her mouth, though she couldn't quite explain why. Darius didn't look at her when he spoke. "I'm not sure," he said quietly, almost to himself. "But for now, we need to survive. We need to get out of the storm and find shelter." Ava nodded, knowing he was right. For now, survival was all that mattered. But as they walked together, she couldn't help but wonder what would come next. Would they go back to being enemies? Or was there something more to this strange bond forming between them? The future was uncertain, but for now, in this moment, Ava could only focus on one thing: keeping the pups safe. The rest would come later, but for now, Darius was no longer her enemy. He was her ally, and that was enough. As the sun began to set, casting a pale golden glow over the now quiet forest, Darius and Ava reached the edge of the woods. The snow had softened into a gentle layer, and the harsh winds had finally calmed, leaving behind a world that seemed untouched by the storm. Ava was exhausted, her muscles sore from the long journey, but she pressed on, her thoughts focused on the pups in her arms. Darius walked beside her, his presence as steady and unyielding as the mountains that loomed in the distance. They had made it through the worst of the storm, but Ava knew the real challenge was only just beginning. "We're almost there," Darius said, his voice low, but reassuring. Ava glanced up at him, her eyes meeting his for a brief moment. There was something different in his gaze now, something she couldn't quite place. It wasn't the cold, calculating look of a ruler. It was something softer, more human. "Where are we going?" she asked, her voice hoarse from the cold and the hours of silence. Darius looked ahead, his expression unreadable. "My lands are just beyond this ridge," he said. "We'll find shelter there." Ava felt a knot tighten in her stomach. His lands. The Alpha King's territory. She had never imagined she would set foot in it, let alone walk beside the man who ruled it. But now, as they drew closer to the border of his kingdom, she couldn't help but wonder what awaited her there. Would he keep her as a prisoner? Would he send her back to her pack, to face whatever punishment awaited her? Or was there something else at play here, something neither of them could yet understand? Darius led her to a small clearing nestled between the trees, the air thick with the scent of pine and the remnants of the snowstorm. A small cabin stood in the center, smoke curling from the chimney, offering a sign of warmth and safety. "This is where we'll stay for the night," Darius said, turning to Ava as he opened the door. Ava stepped inside, her eyes adjusting to the dim light of the fire burning in the hearth. The warmth hit her like a wave, and for the first time in what felt like days, she let herself relax. The pups, still nestled in her arms, began to stir, their soft whimpers a reminder of the struggle they had all faced. She gently placed them on a bed of furs near the fire, wrapping them in the warmth of the room. Darius closed the door behind them, his footsteps heavy as he moved to stand by the fire, his back turned to her. Ava couldn't help but watch him, her thoughts swirling in confusion. What did this all mean? Why had he helped her? He didn't know her anything. He could have left her to die in the storm, just as her pack had done. But instead, he had stayed with her, protected her, even after everything that had happened between their packs. "Thank you," she said quietly, breaking the silence. Darius turned to face her, his expression unreadable. "For what?" he asked, his voice low. "For everything," Ava replied, her gaze softening. "For saving us, for protecting us when you didn't have to." Darius stared at her for a moment, his eyes searching hers, as if trying to find the right words. But instead of speaking, he nodded, his jaw tightening slightly. "It's not about that," he said finally, his voice hoarse. "It's about survival. We all need to survive. And right now, we're in this together." Ava's heart skipped a beat at his words. Together. The word hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. She had never expected to hear him say it. Not after everything that had happened, not after the war that had torn their lives apart. But in this small cabin, with the fire crackling softly and the pups safe for the moment, she couldn't deny the strange feeling that had settled in her chest. She was beginning to understand that survival wasn't just about fighting or winning. It was about the bonds they forged in the midst of chaos, the connections they made when everything else seemed to fall apart. And maybe, just maybe, this strange alliance between her and Darius was the first step in something neither of them could have predicted. Darius sat down near the fire, his eyes still locked on her, his expression softening just slightly. "You don't have to thank me," he said quietly. "I'm not doing this for gratitude. I'm doing this because it's the right thing to do." Ava felt something stir inside her at his words, something that made her chest tighten. For the first time in a long while, she allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, there was still hope. The future was uncertain, and the path ahead was shrouded in danger and uncertainty. But in this moment, she knew that whatever came next, they had made it through the storm together. And that was all that mattered. "We'll figure this out," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the crackling of the fire. Darius nodded, the corners of his mouth twitching ever so slightly. One step at a time. As the fire flickered in the hearth, Ava let out a deep breath, allowing herself to finally relax. The storm outside had passed, and though the world was still uncertain, she felt a strange sense of calm wash over her. She wasn't alone anymore. They were in this together, and that was a start. "I'm so glad you're sticking with us. Let's continue the story." The fire crackled softly in the small cabin, casting flickering shadows on the walls as Darius and Ava sat together, the weight of their shared silence filling the room. Ava felt strangely calm in the warmth, but her mind was still racing. She had survived the night in the storm, but the truth was, she still didn't know what would come next. What did this strange alliance between her and Darius mean? He was the Alpha King, the ruler of her enemies. But now, here they were, sharing space, sharing safety, and even, in some strange way, understanding each other. Ava glanced at Darius, his posture relaxed as he leaned against the wall, his eyes watching the flames. There was a quiet intensity to him, something she hadn't noticed before. In the few days she had known him, he had gone from her sworn enemy to someone she couldn't fully understand. He wasn't the ruthless leader of a pack anymore. He was something else, someone else. "What happens now?" Ava asked, breaking the silence, her voice tentative. Darius looked at her, his blue eyes narrowing slightly as he considered her question. "Now, we wait," he said, his voice steady but tinged with an uncertainty that surprised her. "We wait for the storm to pass, for the world outside to settle. Then we figure out what comes next." Ava nodded, though her thoughts were still a whirlwind. "And what about your pack?" she asked. "What will they say when they find out I'm here?" Darius didn't hesitate. "I'll deal with that when it comes," he said simply. "For now, we're safe. And that's all that matters." Ava wanted to argue, wanted to ask him more about his intentions, about his plan, but she couldn't. She knew he was right. Right now, safety was the priority. They had made it through the storm, and in that moment, that was enough. As the hours passed, Ava and Darius settled into an uneasy quiet. She couldn't shake the feeling that their situation was more complicated than either of them could fully grasp. She had never expected to be here, in this cabin, alone with him, much less to be relying on him for protection. He was the Alpha King, and she was an Omega, rejected by her own pack. Yet here they were, thrown together by fate, by the storm, and by something else she couldn't quite define. She glanced at Darius again, her gaze lingering a little longer this time. He caught her eye and held her stare, a small smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "What are you thinking?" he asked, his voice surprisingly soft. Ava's heart skipped a beat. "I don't know," she said, her voice quieter than she intended. "I'm just confused." Darius leaned forward slightly, his expression thoughtful. "I get that," he said. "This is confusing. But sometimes, things happen for a reason, even if we can't see it right away." Ava wasn't sure if she believed him. She wanted to believe that there was some greater plan behind everything that had happened, but it was hard. She had spent so many years being taught that her place in the world was defined by her Omega status, by her pack, and now, everything was different. She wasn't sure where she fit anymore. "What about you?" Ava asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "What do you think happens next?" Darius paused for a long moment, his eyes unreadable. "I think we take it one step at a time," he said finally. "For now, we're both stuck in this situation, and we're going to have to work together to get through it. After that, we'll see where it takes us." Ava nodded slowly, his words sinking in. She didn't know what the future held, but she knew one thing for sure. She wasn't alone anymore. As the fire burned low and the cabin grew quieter, Ava felt a sense of calm settle over her. She could still feel the weight of everything that had happened. The fear, the uncertainty, but for the first time in a long while, she felt a glimmer of hope. She didn't know what Darius's plan was, or what his intentions were, but she knew that, for now, they had to survive. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. The night stretched on, the fire flickering low, and Ava closed her eyes, allowing herself a moment of peace. She had made it through the storm. And now, with Darius by her side, maybe they could face whatever came next. The future was still uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, Ava felt like she had a chance. The morning light filtered softly through the small window of the cabin, casting gentle rays across the room where Ava and Darius sat, the fire now a faint glow in the hearth. The silence between them had become comfortable, but Ava could feel the weight of what was to come, the future pressing on her mind. She knew the time to face the reality of their situation was coming, and there was no avoiding it any longer. Darius, who had been staring into the fire, turned to look at her. His expression, though calm, betrayed a quiet intensity that made Ava's heart skip a beat. "We need to talk," he said, his voice steady but carrying a certain gravity that made her sit up straighter. Ava nodded, her breath catching in her throat. "About what?" she asked, though she knew the answer. "About what happens now," Darius replied, his gaze locking with hers. "About us." Ava swallowed hard, her mind racing. She had known this moment would come, but now that it was here, she wasn't sure what to say. "We don't have to do this," she said softly, her voice shaking slightly. "We can go our separate ways once this storm is over, and we can pretend none of this ever happened." Darius shook his head, his eyes narrowing. "It's not that simple, Ava," he said. "You're not just some Omega I found in the woods. You're different. I can't explain it, but there's something between us." His words caught Ava off guard, and for a moment, she didn't know how to respond. There was a part of her that wanted to push him away, to remind him of who they were, where they came from, but another part of her, one she didn't fully understand, wanted to lean in, to explore the strange pull she felt towards him. She looked down at her hands, twisting them together in her lap, unsure of how to process what he was saying. "I never asked for this," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't want to be in this position. I didn't want to be a pawn in this war, to be used like this." Darius's expression softened, his eyes filled with something akin to regret. "Neither did I," he said quietly. "But we're here now, and I can't ignore what I feel." Ava shook her head, her heart racing. "You're the Alpha King," she said, her voice stronger now. "I'm just an Omega. You have everything, and I have nothing. We don't belong in the same world." Darius stood and walked toward her, his footsteps slow and deliberate. "You're wrong," he said, kneeling in front of her. "You may be an Omega, but you're not nothing. And I don't care about the differences between our worlds. What I care about is what's right in front of me." His hand reached out, gently lifting her chin so their eyes met. "What's right in front of me is you." Ava's breath caught in her throat as his words settled over her. She wanted to pull away, to reject everything he was saying, but there was a part of her that wanted to believe him, wanted to believe that something real could come from this impossible situation. "I can't be your Luna," she said, her voice breaking. "I can't. Not after everything." Darius's gaze softened even further, and he took her hands in his. "I'm not asking you to be my Luna," he said. "Not yet, anyway. I'm asking you to stand beside me, to survive with me, to see where this goes. There's no war here, Ava. There's just us. And whatever happens, I'll protect you. I'll protect these pups." His words sank into her, filling the empty spaces in her heart she hadn't realized were there. She wasn't sure if she could believe him, but there was something in his eyes, something real, that made her want to try. She had spent so many years living in fear, surviving on her own, but here, with Darius, she felt like maybe, just maybe, there was a chance for something more. "I don't know what this is," she whispered, her voice trembling. "But I can't go back to the way things were. I can't go back to my pack." Darius nodded, his grip on her hands tightening. "Then we'll make our own path," he said, his voice resolute. Together, Ava looked into his eyes, her heart pounding in her chest. There were so many things she didn't understand, so many things she was scared of, but in this moment, with Darius kneeling before her, there was one thing she was certain of. She wasn't alone anymore. She wasn't a prisoner of her past or her pack. She was free, free to choose her future. "All right," she said quietly, her voice steadying. Together, Darius smiled, a genuine smile that made his eyes light up, and for the first time in a long while, Ava felt something shift inside her, a sense of hope, of possibility. Whatever came next, she knew one thing. They would face it together. "I'm glad you're still with us. Let's continue the journey." As the days passed, the tension between Ava and Darius began to shift. What started as an uneasy alliance slowly evolved into something more. They had begun to trust each other, share their thoughts, and even laugh, though it felt foreign at times. Ava still couldn't quite wrap her mind around the fact that she was traveling with the Alpha King, the man who had once been her enemy, yet here they were, fighting side by side for survival. Their journey was far from easy, but in those quiet moments when they rested by the fire, Ava started to see a side of Darius that she hadn't expected. He was kind, thoughtful, and protective, not just of her but of the pups they had both promised to protect. He would stay up late, watching over them, his sharp eyes scanning the surroundings, always alert. Ava, too, found herself caring more than she wanted to admit. The fear that had consumed her heart since she was cast aside by her pack started to ease. It wasn't gone completely, but for the first time in a long while, she felt like she had someone to rely on, someone who wouldn't abandon her. But even as the trust between them grew, there was still one question that lingered in the back of Ava's mind. What was Darius's true intention? Was he really helping her because of some sense of duty, or was there something else? Ava knew she had to find out. She couldn't afford to be naive. She had lived a life of survival, not trusting anyone, and now, with everything changing so quickly, she didn't know what to think. One evening, as the sun dipped low in the sky, casting the landscape in hues of red and gold, Ava decided to ask him. They were sitting around the fire, the pups sleeping soundly beside them, when she finally spoke. "Darius," she began, her voice hesitant. "Why are you really helping me?" Darius, who had been staring into the flames, didn't immediately respond. Instead, he took a long breath and turned to face her. There was a flicker of something in his eyes, something hard to decipher, but it was there. "I told you already," he said, his voice steady, though there was an edge to it. "We're in this together. For now, that's enough." Ava shook her head slightly, not satisfied with the answer. "No, that's not what I mean," she pressed. "I know you're helping me, but I can't help but wonder if there's something more. Is this some strategy for your pack, or are you just protecting me because you feel sorry for me?" Darius's expression didn't change, but she could see the muscles in his jaw tighten slightly. "I'm not doing this out of pity," he said, his tone firm. "I'm doing it because it's what I want to do. You're more than just a pawn in some game, Ava. I don't see you that way. I see you as someone who deserves to be treated with respect, someone who deserves more than what your pack gave you." Ava was taken aback by his words. She had expected him to brush her off, to give her some political answer, but instead, he was being honest, perhaps too honest. She wasn't sure how to respond to that. She had spent so long fighting for survival, keeping her emotions buried beneath a shield of bitterness and distrust, that hearing Darius speak so openly was almost too much. She looked away for a moment, her gaze falling to the fire. "I don't know what to do with all of this," she said quietly, her voice thick with uncertainty. "I don't know how to trust anyone, least of all you." Darius didn't speak right away. Instead, he moved closer to her, his presence solid and steady. "Trust takes time," he said, his voice softer now. "I don't expect you to trust me overnight, but I'm not going anywhere. We'll take it one step at a time, together." Ava felt a strange warmth spread through her chest at his words. She wasn't sure what it meant, but there was something in his voice, in his determination, that made her believe him. For the first time in a long while, she felt like she could allow herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, there was hope for a different future. The rest of the night passed quietly. The two of them sat in companionable silence, the crackling fire filling the space between them. Ava couldn't stop thinking about what Darius had said. She didn't know what this would lead to, didn't know where their path would take them, but she did know one thing. She wasn't alone anymore. The storm had passed, and while the road ahead was still unclear, she wasn't facing it by herself. As the fire burned down to embers and the night deepened around them, Ava allowed herself a moment of peace, a moment where the weight of everything that had happened didn't feel so heavy. For now, that was enough. The following days brought with them a fragile peace, one that neither Ava nor Darius had expected. As they continued their journey through the wild terrain, the tension between them slowly dissipated, replaced by a quiet understanding that neither fully acknowledged but both felt. They had been traveling together for what felt like an eternity, yet every step they took seemed to pull them closer to something neither of them could predict. Ava found herself watching Darius more often now, not just because he was the Alpha King, but because there was something in the way he carried himself, something in his eyes that made her question everything she thought she knew about him. She had expected coldness, authority, the sharp edges of a man who ruled with iron, but what she saw in Darius was different. He wasn't just a king. He was a man who had been shaped by loss, by power, and by the burdens of leadership. And despite all that, he was still capable of kindness. He was still capable of protecting those who couldn't protect themselves. Ava didn't know how to feel about that. She didn't know if she could trust him, if she could allow herself to believe in the possibility of something more than just survival. But she couldn't deny the pull she felt whenever he was near, the way he made her feel like, for once, she wasn't invisible. For once, she wasn't a burden. And that terrified her. Are you thinking about something? Darius's voice broke through her thoughts, pulling her back to the present. She hadn't realized she had been staring at him until his piercing gaze met hers, his expression unreadable but steady. I was just wondering, she said softly, her voice betraying her uncertainty, why you've been helping me all this time. You've never once tried to send me back to my pack. You never forced me to do anything I didn't want to. Darius didn't immediately respond. Instead, he paused, his eyes searching the horizon, as if contemplating something far beyond the reach of their small camp. I told you before, he said quietly. It's not about what I want from you. It's about doing what's right. And right now, helping you is the right thing to do. Ava swallowed hard. She wanted to argue, wanted to question him further, but there was a sincerity in his words that made her doubt the harsh assumptions she had built up over the years. But your pack, she whispered, they will never accept me. I'm just an Omega, someone who's been abandoned by her own people. How could they ever accept me, especially after everything that's happened? Darius turned to face her fully now, his expression softening, and for a moment, Ava saw something in his eyes, something raw, something vulnerable. I can't speak for my pack, he said, his voice low but firm, but I know what I believe. I believe that you deserve more than to be cast aside. You've shown more courage and strength than anyone I've ever known. I may be the Alpha King, but even I see that. Ava felt her heart race at his words, a mixture of warmth and fear filling her chest. She had never been praised like this, never been told she was worth more than what she had been told by others. She wanted to pull away, to tell him it was all a mistake, that she didn't deserve his kindness, but the truth was, she was starting to believe him. I don't know if I can ever be what you expect me to be, she said quietly, her voice shaking slightly, but I'm trying. For the pups, for myself. I just don't know what happens next. Darius stepped closer, his presence looming but not threatening, like a shield standing between her and the world. What happens next, he said, his voice calm and steady, is that we keep going. We keep moving forward, and we do it together. We figure this out, one step at a time. Ava nodded slowly, his words sinking into her heart. For the first time in a long while, she felt like maybe there was a way out of the darkness, a way to rebuild the pieces of her broken life. She had spent so long running, fighting, surviving, but now, with Darius by her side, she felt like she could finally breathe again. All right, she whispered, her voice steadying. Together. Darius smiled, the faintest hint of warmth in his eyes, and Ava felt something shift inside her, something that had been locked away for far too long. The journey ahead was uncertain, and she still didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in what felt like forever, she felt a glimmer of hope. She wasn't alone anymore. And that was enough for now. Days passed, and Ava found herself settling into a new rhythm. The uncertainty that had weighed on her shoulders since her departure from her pack began to lift, even if just a little. She and Darius continued their journey, moving cautiously toward his lands, but there was an undeniable shift between them. They were no longer simply two people forced together by circumstance. They were something more. Ava could feel it in the way they spoke, in the way they worked together to protect the pups, and even in the quiet moments by the fire, when their words weren't needed to fill the space. It wasn't easy, of course. There were moments when Ava found herself questioning what was real, what was just a fleeting connection born out of their shared hardships. She wasn't naive. She knew the stakes were high. She wasn't simply a woman thrown into the world of an Alpha King. She was an Omega, cast aside, broken in ways she couldn't even express. But every time Darius looked at her, every time he reached out a hand to help her or to protect her, Ava couldn't ignore the pull she felt toward him. It was more than just duty. It was something deeper, something that made her heart beat a little faster when their eyes met. But she knew the reality of their world would catch up to them sooner or later. The question of whether they could truly overcome their differences, whether Darius could keep his promises to her and to the pups, lingered in the back of her mind. They reached the borders of Darius's territory as the sun set one evening, painting the sky with hues of orange and purple. Ava felt a knot of nervous anticipation in her stomach as she looked out over the unfamiliar landscape. This was it, the place she had been avoiding, the place where the future would be decided. She could feel the weight of it in the air. "We're almost there," Darius said, his voice steady, though Ava could hear the underlying tension in it. He had been quiet for most of the journey, his thoughts likely occupied with what awaited them at the border. Ava nodded, though her heart was pounding in her chest. "I know," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "But what happens when we get there?" Darius glanced at her, his expression softening. "We face it together," he said simply. "Whatever comes, we face it together." Ava felt a sense of calm wash over her at his words, though it was quickly replaced by a new surge of anxiety. She had spent her life avoiding the pack, avoiding her fate as an Omega. But now, with Darius beside her, she felt like maybe, just maybe, she had a chance to change everything. As they approached the gates of Darius's kingdom, Ava could see the first signs of life. Guards stationed at the entrance, towering structures in the distance, and the unmistakable scent of wolves in the air. She had arrived at the heart of his power. "Darius," she said, her voice trembling slightly, "what if they don't accept me? What if they see me as nothing more than a weakness?" Darius's expression darkened for a moment, but then he smiled, a rare, genuine smile that made his eyes soften. "Then they'll be wrong," he said, his voice filled with conviction. "And I'll make sure. They know it." Ava swallowed hard, her mind racing with 1,000 thoughts. She had never been part of a pack like this, never imagined being accepted by one so powerful, so far removed from the world she had known. But she couldn't deny the pull she felt toward Darius. She couldn't ignore the hope that was beginning to take root inside her, a hope that maybe, just maybe, she could finally find her place. The gates opened, and Darius led her through, his hand never leaving her side. The moment they stepped inside, Ava felt the eyes of the pack on her. She could feel the weight of their gaze, the judgment, the curiosity, but there was something else, something more. It was as if they were waiting to see what Darius would do, waiting to see how this new chapter would unfold. Ava held her head high, though her heart raced in her chest. She wasn't sure what the future would hold, but for the first time in her life, she wasn't running. She was facing it head-on, with Darius beside her. "Welcome to my home," Darius said softly, his voice steady despite the tension that hung in the air. Ava turned to him, her eyes meeting his, and for a brief moment, she felt like she might just be able to do this. "Together," she whispered, her voice filled with a newfound strength. Darius nodded, his grip tightening around her hand. "Together," he agreed. And in that moment, Ava knew that no matter what came next, they would face it side by side.